Life is for exploring. So where will your curiosity take you? You're invited to Alpha this new year. The best conversations happen over great food with interesting people. A place for the open-minded. And they're not quite sure? A space to ask whatever you like. Or nothing at all. Who knows what this new year will bring? But let's make it one to remember, where we grab all life's got to offer. We'll never have it all figured out, but that's all part of the adventure. Stay curious. Try Alpha.
Very good. Hello, everybody. So welcome to Colchester Road Baptist Church. Great to be able to welcome you here tonight. My name's Andy Fitzgerald. I'm one of the ministers here, working with Jerry. You might have seen him at the door. And hopefully you know you're attending an evening with Simon Thomas. Are you expecting that? Yes. Very good. Simon's in the room. Why don't we just welcome him? Very good. Well, welcome to you all. Thank you so much for coming along tonight, and a warm welcome to our church here, Colchester Road. You're very, very welcome. Hope you feel at home. Just a little bit of housekeeping for you. If there's a fire, we encourage you to get out of the building. Fire exits are labelled, as you see, by the green boxes on the different doors, and the assembly point is at Ely Road, which is the opposite side of the road from the car park here to my left-hand side. If you need toilets are through these doors to my right-hand side. I said to Simon when he was looking for it earlier, just look for his face and you'll find them. You'll find them. Well, we're going to hear from Simon a little bit later on. We're going to hear his story, and we're so grateful to Simon for coming along and joining us tonight. But before we hear from Simon, you're going to hear from a few of my friends. Is that all right with you? Yes. Yes, I know. Well, you're quite right to be unsure at this point because you don't know who they are. Well, you're going to meet two friends of mine, one called Abby and one called Jim. And the reason you're going to meet them is because Simon's visit is associated with the launch of something called the Alpha Course. And we run the Alpha Course twice a year. The Alpha Course is an opportunity for you to explore the big questions of life and faith in an informal setting. You can say as little or as much as you like. And the good thing about it is you get a free meal. I know. We don't do the Alpha Course here in this church building. We actually do it in a pub down the road, the Royal George Inn. And you can come and you watch a video in your own time, and we gather together and then we discuss some of these big questions of life and faith. Like, is there more to life than this? Who is Jesus? What is the Bible? Is it worth reading? What about prayer? Is prayer even relevant today? You can explore those kind of questions together, and we have a fantastic time. And Abby and Jim have both been on the Alpha Course before, and so I was just going to ask them a few questions so you can get firsthand their experience. So why don't we give Jim and Abby a big round of applause? They come and join me at the front. Don't be shy now, don't be shy. Come on, Abby. This is Abby. And this is Jim. Jim's actually answering questions first, isn't he? So we need to wait for Jim. Great. Well, great to see you both. Thank you so much for coming along tonight. And poor old Jim thought I was going to ask him the questions from his seat right at the back row. So let's be kind to Jim. Abby, I'm actually going to start with you. Yeah, well done. You read the script. Abby, why did you attend the Alpha Course and what were you expecting?
So I attended because my mother-in-law, Kathy Dines, asked if I wanted to come. I was new to the area, had moved to Ipswich a few months before, and she invited me along. My expectations, I think I had quite good expectations because I'd done the course before at my church in Hertfordshire. So I knew kind of the layout, the setup, I'd seen some of the videos. But I didn't know it was going to be in a pub, so that was a bonus. I wanted to explore my relationship with God, my faith, and questions that we all have, going through life.
And so what was your experience on Alpha?
I met some really, really lovely people. Andy did pay me to say that. No, I had a really brilliant experience. Life hasn't been straightforward over the last few years, so I had lots of doubts going on in my mind about my faith, about where I stood with God. So it was an experience for me to ask the questions, the challenging questions, put Andy through his paces. So I learnt a lot about myself, about my faith, and I kind of reignited my relationship with God, which was really special.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Abby. And Jim, you went on quite a journey at Alpha as well, didn't you? And I know you came to Alpha because you were invited by Mo. Mo's here this evening. Let's welcome Mo. Come on. Yeah. And Abby, I did this with your videos, you know. Jim, just tell us what happened with you. Like, what was your experience? I know it had a particular impact on you. So, what happened when you were on the Alpha course?
Well, the main thing is, as I say, at school, I was very obviously into God and all that sort of thing, and I desperately wanted to go to grammar school. So every night for at least 2 or 3 years, I prayed and prayed and prayed. And luckily, I was one of 3 that actually got through that year. So for me, God existed at that very time. Yeah. Life comes on, you move on to jobs and families and what have you, and I'm afraid God took a very, very long back step. In 2020, along came COVID. I also had cancer at the same time. And it took me 2 years to get back to some sort of health. So I was desperate to find something. By this time, Mo is a very good podiatrist, if anybody's interested. She suggested that I come along to CRB, to see CRBC, if that's right. And then suggested I tried Alpha. And since that day, I was just amazed at everything that was going on. The church provided so many things to do, socially and spiritually, and it just changed my whole outlook on life. And going to Alpha gave me a very quick introduction into the God that I'd lost and forgotten.
It was a very moving moment. As part of Alpha, we do an Alpha away day, and that's probably after about week 7 of the course. And Jim didn't say very much at Alpha for the 7 weeks, and then he was the first to speak at the away day, and he just shared this story of how he'd reconnected with the God that he'd prayed to so long ago. And now he's at church pretty much every week. He's part of our midweek groups. Yeah. It's made quite a big difference to your life, hasn't it?
Yeah, you got fed up with me.
Not at all. Not at all. Not at all.
There was just so much going on. There's coffee and chat tomorrow. There's the monthly lunches. And the people are just so friendly. So I've made so many new friends, which is what I was wanting and looking for.
Brilliant, Jim. Thank you. So, Abby, what would you say to anyone who might be considering Alpha? How would you encourage them to go for it? Come along this time.
Please just give it a go. You will meet some really lovely people and you will get answers to questions that are on your mind and that are really hard to ask in any other forum. You will gain a wonderful church if you choose to at the end. If not, you would get some really nice free meals and some really nice social kind of activity during the week. But just go for it. It's fantastic.
Brilliant. Thanks, Abby. And the same question to you, Jim.
Well, it'll be the same answer, I'm afraid.
That's fine. That's fine.
I was, whether you're a well-established Christian or a very, very baby Christian like myself, there's something Alpha for everybody. You'll find that despite what you may think and hear about and look at, there's always something else underneath everything. And as Abby said, the leaders are absolutely fabulous. They really are. They're knowledgeable, easygoing, friendly, lots and lots of guidance. So
keep going, Jim. Keep going.
I think I've said all I'm going to say now.
Very good. Let's just hear it for Abby and for Jim, shall we? Thanks so much, both of you. Yeah, of course. Yeah, of course. All right. Brilliant. Well, we would love to invite you along to Alpha this time. Alpha starts in February, it's this week, isn't it? Alpha doesn't start this week, but it starts in February. We would love for you to come along. If you want to ask a little bit more about it, come and speak to me after the event tonight. Happy to answer your questions. But we all have questions, don't we? We all have questions about life and about faith. And it's very difficult to find a space where we can ask those questions and address those questions and discuss them. This is the space where you can do that. So if you'd like to come along, do sign up. Come and speak to me. We would love for you to join us on this journey. Let's just watch this video, which tells us a little bit more about the Alpha course.
In the modern world, there's not much space for life's big questions.
Oh my God.
Is there a map to this?
Not much time set aside for. Why am I here?
I don't think there's more to life than each other. I think we are the point.
Is there more to life than this?
Some people dream of finding happiness through money.
I like cars.
Something awakened in me. It was a realization I would never find happiness where I was looking for it.
Where's God in all this?
Growing up, I've lost a lot of people. I would like answers for that.
Are you real, God?
What's the point in praying?
What's the purpose behind all this?
We all have different perspectives on the meaning of life.
Does faith do more harm than good?
It takes a lot for me to trust someone.
The Alpha Film series makes space for the big questions. Each episode unpacks a new topic and gives you time to explore what you think. Try Alpha.
Excellent. Well, we are delighted to have a special guest with us tonight. We've already mentioned him, but now it's the time to welcome him and to hear from him. So would you please offer a warm welcome to Simon Thomas. Brilliant. Thank you. Simon, thank you so much.
It's a pleasure.
For joining us tonight.
I'm Church of England background. This is very Church of England. My dad was bigger. He would not like this empty front row.
Oh, really? And I was surprised Jerry, the other minister, didn't sit on the back. There. Why didn't you sit on the front row, Jerry? Okay.
Why did he come down?
Come on. Yeah.
He is.
There he is. Come on.
Well
Brilliant. Problem with Jerry is he'll break all the rules and he'll lie across the chairs now.
It's funny though, isn't it? Because if you go to the theatre or concert, everyone wants to be on the front row.
Yeah.
Go to church, people steer clear of the front row.
Maybe they thought you'd smell or something. I don't know.
No, not yet.
Hey! Simon, delighted that you're here. And I was saying to you backstage that during Christmas I was reading Simon's book. Has anyone got Simon's book? Wow.
Yeah.
It's still available. I encourage you to buy a copy. But I was reading Simon's book during Christmas, and I feel like I know Simon so well, and yet he's met me, he's spoken to me for maybe 20 minutes. Like, a bit weird, probably, isn't it? But I do feel like I know you so well, and yet there's so much to talk about and so much in your book that we don't know about you, and I don't know about you. So tonight we're going to start right at the very beginning. And we're going to hear your story about more recent times as well as talk about Gemma and some of the experiences that you've had. So let's start right at the beginning. Where were you born? Tell us about your family, your parents.
Well, it's gratuitous plug, it's my birthday yesterday.
We do know that. Yeah.
So I'm not one of those, I'm not uncomfortable about age. 52 years ago. I know.
Happy
it's hard
birthday.
to believe. I was born in Norwich.
Hey! Anyone from Norwich here tonight?
Yay!
Hey, look at that. One or two.
They've come into blue territory, and this chap down the front row. Can we see your socks, sir? Come on, just stand up here a minute. Here we go. Come on. Just show everyone the socks. Here we go. Oh. I didn't realise it was that as well. I mean, that's...
Wow, that's
listen, Premier League, Championship, I know where I'd rather be, but it's a painful league to be in. But we won't go on that. I was born in Norwich.
Yep.
And my dad was a vicar. So he was a curate at the time in a place called Cromer on the North Norfolk coast. And my mum still lives there. My dad sadly passed away around about 4 years ago. So that was where I spent the first 3 years of life. And then we were in a very rural village called Grimston, just outside Kings Lynn in West Norfolk till I was 10. So I kind of grew up with church life, pretty inescapable when your dad's a vicar, went to Sunday school and all that. And, you know, I always believed that God was real. You know, one of the things I loved about my parents were, because having being a vicar's son, I've heard lots of stories from other vicars' sons and daughters where it's not been a particularly happy tale. They felt that kind of faith, church and all those kind of things were pressed upon them, and it was almost a little bit suffocating. I never felt that with mum and dad. It was part of family life. Dad never forced us to go to church as we got older, but for me it was part of family life. I loved it. A lot of my good friends would go to church as well. So faith, God was very much part of family life. Friends would find it a little bit weird when they came round for a play date. We didn't call them play dates though in the 70s. Just, come on mate, come round and play football in the garden. You know, if they stayed for tea, we'd find it slightly strange that my mum and dad would say grace before the meal, but it was, Dad's a vicar, what do you expect? So that was my kind of youth, and we moved down to Surrey when I was 10. Dad took on a big church in a place called Cheam that I doubt anyone here has heard of. Oh, someone has, someone's not. Oh, two.
Look at
two
that.
People have heard of Cheam, 3 people have heard of Cheam, 4, but no, we're stopping the game here. Let's just say more people have heard of Cheam than I thought. And that's where I did most of my growing up. Actually, I was speaking at my dad's old church the Sunday before last, which was amazing.
Wow.
Just going back there and telling some of the stories. So, yeah, I had a really happy childhood, and because I always believed, listen, when I was growing up in the 70s and early 80s, particularly Liverpool were the team to follow. They were in there. What they're doing now is impressive, nothing compared to the 70s and 80s. They were bestriding everywhere in terms of Europe and the Division 1 as it was back then. And all my friends at school in Norfolk wore Liverpool tops. Wow, every single one of them, apart from me and one other. And we wore Norwich tops because my godfather, who sadly passed away a couple of years ago, was a Methodist minister, massive Aston Villa fan. Right. He managed over the course of a few years to visit every single football league club in the land. A complete nutter when it came to football. But he really said to me, you need to support your local team. He was born and bred in Birmingham, so he went for Villa, not Birmingham City. And it kind of stuck with me, and I felt I'm going to stick with this team called Norwich. And I'll be honest, there's been more thin than thick. But when the thick times have come, it's been marvellous. When the thin times have come, it's been less than marvellous. But I've always believed in supporting your own team. Nice. So that's who I still follow to this day.
Very good. I was saying to Simon that my family and Norwich supporters, some of you know that, don't you? I actually worked at Carrow Road.
But you're Arsenal, aren't you?
I'm
so
Arsenal,
you're okay.
Yeah.
You could take this job.
I was born in London, but technically I should be a West Ham fan, apparently.
Okay.
But we'll gloss over that. We do have a Liverpool fan, our youth worker, in the room.
Where's he? Or
she? He's the one
there
with the hat.
He is. Good evening.
So you're the influence of your parents on your own faith. What was that? Would you say that was significant?
Yeah, I mean, it's a story I've told once or twice over the last few years. In that, when did kind of faith, God, become something that was real?
Yeah.
And you know, for quite a few years, God was kind of this little bit of an abject figure. I knew that this was what Dad's job was about. I knew that God was part of family life and it was part of church life. But it all felt a little bit abstract, didn't feel particularly real. Sounded interesting, but not particularly real for a 7-year-old growing up in Norfolk. And we had a remarkable but very scary experience when I was 7. And we'd had one of those mornings. I never understood, all the years Dad was alive and working, why ministers have so many meetings, but he just always had meetings, just non-stop meetings. And it was a Saturday morning in kind of springtime in Grimston in West Norfolk. And Dad has been in meetings all morning. My sister Becky was a year younger than me, so she was 6 at the time. Hannah was still not even a year old, so not really the kind of age you're playing with them, but it just rained all morning. And I know for people of a certain generation, you'll find this hard to believe, but back then there were only 3 channels on the whole of the television. There was BBC One, BBC Two, and ITV. It wasn't even Channel 4 days at this point. And the kind of kids' programs for the morning had run out. And I was one of those kids, I just wanted to be outside, but it was absolutely hawking it down with rain, so I couldn't go anywhere. We were going a bit stir-crazy. So after lunch, I think Dad had recognised the fact that he hadn't been around and been in meetings. We were all gone a bit mad. And he said, let's go out for a walk, because it had kind of cleared up and the sun was beginning to shine. So we went to walk in these woods near where we lived, about 2 miles away, called Massingham Woods. And so we walked through this forest. And for me, as a tree climber, an avid tree climber at this age, like a lot of boys are, or certainly used to be before devices came along. Well, that's a whole nother topic. I just wanted to climb trees, but the problem was this forest was essentially pine trees. And if you know anything about your trees, a pine tree is very difficult to scale because there's not a lot in the way of branches. But there was this one tree about halfway down the forest clearing that was a big old yew tree. I was like, right, and up it went. Mum's getting nervous, as Mum always did. And I came down and kind of sat in the middle of the two huge branches that came out of the trunk, just here. And my dad was sort of stood here. My mum was stood about there holding my very little sister Hannah, and Becky was stood around about here. And people are probably thinking, for 7 years of age, this is quite vivid memory, but you'll understand in a moment why I remember this so vividly. And it starts raining again. Now it's springtime, the leaves are on the trees. We've got an amazing shelter above us. And Mum says, I think we need to move to the other side of the clearing, so across the kind of large pathway in the middle to the trees the other side. I'm like, no, Mum, that's ridiculous. Why do we need to do that? Dad's going, come on, Jill, you don't need to do that. Anyway, so she'll let it lie for a little bit. The rain's getting a bit heavy. And she says it again, I think we need to move to the other side of the clearing. Please, Simon, can you get down? I'm like, no, Mum, why do I want to get down? You know, typical 7-year-old. Dad's going again, come on, Jill, what are you on about? We're fine here. And then she said it for a third time. And all these years later, I can still see that look in her eye as she said it. And she was looking squarely at me and said, well, we need to move. And we need to move now. So I think Dad, for a peaceful life, just said, come on, Simon, get down from the tree. So I reluctantly got down, and we trudged over to the other side of this clearing. And probably within 30 seconds of making it to the other side of the clearing, there was this noise that I only really can describe as sounding like someone was flying a tornado jet through the forest. But of course, you can't really fly a plane through trees. And then I looked up, and there was just this kind of tunnel of fire above us, and then this huge explosion, massive, and this huge thud. And there was smoke everywhere, and you could smell this burning timber everywhere. Wow. And as it cleared and we're screaming, understandably, the tree that I've been sat in 30 seconds ago is now split in two. Wow. And where I'd have been sat, that would have been, without doubt, the end. It was ball lightning, as they described it. It kind of travels almost horizontally. And we ran screaming back to the car, very, very traumatized. And later that evening, some very good Christian friends of ours from our church came round, called Dickie and Rosie, to just sit with us. And we decided to go back to the tree. And we went back, and my mum was retelling the account because everything about it just felt just a really incredible coincidence that she felt the need to move. And then this happens 30 seconds later. My mum's friend Rosemary said, what was it that made you move? Because she's listening thinking, this just doesn't make sense. And she said, I heard a voice, and the voice said, move. And she said, I absolutely believe that was the voice of God. And you know, years later, I was speaking at an event when I was on Blue Peter, a big youth event, and an amazing man that some of you will recognize the name of, he's no longer with us, called Gerald Coates, a very prophetic Christian man, came up to me after this big youth event I'd spoken at, which I didn't talk about this story. And he just said, I just got this need to pray with you now. And he said, did something happen to you when you were 7 that made you realize in a really dramatic way that God was real? I said, oh yeah, I nearly got killed by lightning. That was the moment. And some people will say, amazing coincidence, amazing coincidence. As a Christian, as a man of faith, I go, that's way too much of a coincidence. Yeah. That we are being asked to move by my mum when we're already sheltered across. And I've had people say, because there's a video that I've told this story in that's up called Streams. They produce these amazing Christian videos. And I saw lots of comments on the Instagram post about it, just saying that's a mother's intuition. Well, maybe a little bit, but I think it was a lot more than that because so much of it didn't make sense. And yet, when she said those words, I believe it was the voice of God. It made total sense.
Amazing. You've had a number of encounters with God in your life, which we'll come on to. Tell us a bit about school, your experience of school. What subjects did you like?
Well, my experience of school was kind of twofold because up until we left Norfolk, I was rural state school.
Right.
Finished school 3:15. Lovely life, back with your friends, riding your bikes around the village. And then we went down south to Surrey, which is kind of a little bit of a hothouse of education in particular. And a lot of very wealthy families who were able to afford to send their sons and their daughters to public schools and very good schools. And my dad knew that there was a prep school where it had been founded for Vicar's Sons, and Vicar's Sons basically went on the free. So we moved in the kind of Easter of 1983. So I arrive in Cheam, this foreign land as far as I'm concerned, suburbia from rural Norfolk. And 2 weeks after I arrive in Cheam, I'm suddenly thrust into the world of preparatory school. Wow. Which, if you know anything about, is a stark contrast to state school, because suddenly I'm having to get used to wearing shorts all year round. That was a bit odd. I was at a school where they call you by your surname. Your friends call you by your surname. I found that very, very weird. We didn't finish school till 4:30, wow. 5:30 on a Tuesday and a Thursday.
Now I'm a dad, I think they should bring that back.
And we, well, you're like this then. We had Saturday morning school.
Oh, nice.
I hated it. I hated the whole experience because it was such a massive culture shock, going from rural state school to suddenly being at a prep school where you were so far behind educationally. You know, I'd done one term of French. The guys I was sat in the class with were like, they've been doing it 2 years. I was suddenly learning this strange language called Latin. Never heard of Latin in Norfolk, and suddenly I'm being taught it in Surrey, and I just don't know why I'm being taught it. I don't understand what need. No one speaks Latin anymore, but apparently it's going to be useful. I found it really hard, but then I went to public school because it was another school founded for Vicar's Son, so again I went on the free, and I actually really thrived there. I really enjoyed it. I think there was that kind of need to, I think, prove myself, because I'd arrived somewhere. I was the yokel guy from Norfolk who didn't know much and was a bit behind in everything, and I felt that need that I want to prove myself. And when I went to public school, I thought, right, I'm going to catch up with these guys. I'm going to prove I can cut it in a public school. It's very alien to me, but I'm going to do it. And actually those 5 years of public school I really, really enjoyed. I mean, that was a whole day of Saturday school. We used to finish school at 6:30, and I'd get the train back home, and I'd get home about 7:30. So when my son Ethan, who's now 14, is moaning, I'm like, son, honestly, for goodness sake, you're home and it's 3:30. I mean, in terms of now until bedtime, the world's your oyster once you've done the homework. You've got hours. I would get home at 7:30, have a quick bit of tea, do my homework and go to bed, and then repeat it all again the next day.
What he needs is shorts. He'd be much happier then.
I said to him the last time we had snow, and we don't get snow very often, I said, you are not going to be a proper man until you've had a snowball fight in shorts. Because there is nothing quite like a stinger on the inside of your thigh in a pair of shorts. And I go to this fitness group, and I wear shorts whatever the weather. I wear a long sleeve top, and people say, why are you in shorts? I say, because I don't feel the cold, because I spent a little bit of my school life wearing shorts in midwinter.
Nice.
Yeah.
So what subjects were you good at? And how did you end up in television? Was it like always an ambition of yours?
No, not always. I was good at the kind of arts. Terrible at maths. Never kind of got maths. I was all right with maths until someone said, here's algebra. And I was like, what's the point in that? Yeah. I was the same with science. I used to like science until people introduced equations. And I kind of thought, this is too much for me. So I was good. My best one was kind of history and English. So I studied history at university at Birmingham. Yeah. And the only thing I'd done kind of broadcasting-wise, and maybe one or two here remember this, but I worked for a charity called the Oasis Trust that Steve Chalk runs. Yeah, yeah. And they had something many, many years ago in the early 90s called Radio Cracker. And it was for, I think, 2 or 3 years. It's an amazing thing they did. They basically got radio licenses for 1 month around the entire country. Local radio licenses. And they set up these radio stations. The idea was to raise money for some of the projects Oasis were involved in. And we got a local radio station up the road. So I decided this would be fun, and a few mates from church decided it'd be fun. So I did a show only 3 times called The Rock and Laugh Show. It's myself and a comedian who I knew really well in Cheam at the time, came to my mum and dad's church, called Tim Vine, who obviously went on to be quite a well-known comedian, but then he was sort of starting out, so we did a show together. Nice. And I thought I'd really enjoy this kind of art of communication. I think there's something quite thrilling about being live, even though we knew in our heart of hearts there was probably only our families and friends listening. But there was something when that red light went on, even though we were in a church hall up the road from my dad's church, broadcasting to probably around 50 people, if we're honest. It's not what Scott Mills got on Radio 2 this morning in his first day in the breakfast job. But it was fun, and I got a buzz for it. And I'd go to university to study history, because I wanted to do a media course, but back in the early 90s, there were hardly any media courses. I mean, you could count them on both hands across the whole country. Now, my niece Olivia's doing an amazing broadcast sport course up in Manchester. There's so many courses now, but they weren't back there. So I decided I was never going to get on one of these courses. I did try, but I just didn't get near it. And so I just thought, I'll just do what I'm good at. I'll go and read history. I don't know whether I'll use it for anything. The truth is I've used it for nothing. And now my 14-year-old son is asking me history questions because he loves it as well. And I've forgotten half of it. I can't remember. So I was trying to Google subtly. And we had the thing at our university called Guild TV. So if you've been to university on the kind of Freshers' Week, that first week, you go round the kind of society fair where all the kind of sports societies are. There's the kind of the hot air ballooning society that is just really the preserve of the very wealthy students. But there was one society called Guild TV, and I was like, oh, what's that? So I went up to them. And they said, we've got a TV station in the Guild that gets played out in all the bars and the restaurants. And we do loads of programming. So I was like, wow, so can I get involved? And they told me how. So I was like a runner for quite a while. If you know nothing about broadcasting, a runner is basically someone who's doing a job for free, and they kind of get the teas and coffees. It's a pretty thankless task, but it's a good way of getting your foot on the ladder. And so I started doing that, and then I got given a show called The Lunchbox, which was a magazine show every Friday lunchtime. Again, a bit like Radio Cracker, no one watches it. It's on these tiny portable TVs because it was the before the days of widescreen. Again, showing my age, but I reveal my age at the start, so I'm quite comfortable with it. So it's on little portable TVs on mute. No one's watching it. No one's paying any attention. My housemates never knew what I really did on a Friday lunchtime. And they occasionally said, well, I saw you on the TV today. What is that Lunchbox? But I kind of really enjoyed it because it was a proper TV studio. It was a proper control gallery with the sound desk and the vision mixing desk. And I came out of university in 1995 and thought, I really want to do this. Nice. And actually one of the producers I worked with at Guild TV said, you need to chase this. What's the program you'd want to work on? I said, well, I'd love to do Blue Peter. I don't think I'll ever get it, but I'd love to do that. She said, just go for it. So I came back to Suffolk that summer in 1995. Mum and Dad had moved to Beccles by this point. And I'm getting ready for Project Blue Peter. I'm going to try and land this job, but I don't know how. It's I think it was probably pre-internet. The internet had just about started, but it was very, very, there wasn't much of it around. So you had to get kind of a book with all the names of all the editors of all the programs of the various channels. You can find them all online, but back then I had to get a book. And I bought a book called How to Make It as a TV Presenter by a guy called Toby Anstis, who used to be a CBBC presenter, Saturday morning presenter, now on Heart, I think. And I read that about how to make a showreel tape, which is a tape of you presenting. And then I thought, right, I'm going to write letters to lots of people, see if I can get work experience, see if I can get one of those runner's jobs. But the aim is to send this showreel tape into Blue Peter. So I made my showreel tape, and now I'm ready to write these letters. I'm waiting for Dad to finish his morning meetings, and I know he's heading out in the afternoon for more meetings. And finally his office comes available because he's got the computer. Down I go, all ready, and I'm just about to go down. And I think to myself, I'm a Christian. I know that God's been involved in so many different areas of my life, particularly that time when I was 7. And I don't know right now if this is a dream that I've got to be a Blue Peter presenter. I don't know if God's in this or not. I thought I've never really prayed about this once. So I thought I'm just going to pray about this. I'm just going to say a prayer before I go down to write these letters. And it was a very simple prayer, but it's quite direct. And I do believe as a Christian, we can and should be direct with God because you can't pull the wool over God's eyes. He knows everything. So, sometimes just get to the heart of it and say, God, please, I'd given myself 3 years to make it. And so I said, please, I don't want to waste the next 3 years. Just give me a sign that I'm not about to embark on something that you don't want me to embark on. Amen. Go downstairs. I put my books down on Dad's desk. I fire up his old Apple Macintosh computer.
Nice.
Yeah,
took a while.
You remember those? It did take a while. And while I'm waiting for it to fire up, I see my dad's pile of Christian magazines just on the left-hand side of the desk, and I'm just sort of looking at them. And there's one there, and I can't remember, it's called Christianity Today, or whatever it's called, I can't remember. But on the side of the front cover was some of the articles inside. And one of the articles, it just said, the subheader was, Why We Need More Christians in the Media. I'm like, interesting. So I found the page, and it was an article written by Steve Chalk with the Oasis Trust. He was doing a lot of media stuff at the time. He was kind of presenting a little bit on GMTV and other things, and Songs of Praise. And it was also co-written by Pam Rhodes, who was presenting Songs of Praise. So I'm like, right. I start reading this article. And I know there'll be people in here probably maybe haven't been in church for a long time, but quite a lot who have. And you'll no doubt have had those moments in life where you're sitting listening to someone talking, maybe up the front doing the preach or whatever it might be. And it feels like in that moment that message is just for you. It just feels like there's almost no one else in the room. It's like, this has been so said for me where I am right now. It was like this article had been written just for me. The whole thrust of it was, it's all very well as Christians setting up Christian radio stations and Christian TV stations. But actually, as Christians, if we want to affect change, we need to do what Jesus did, which is, he was not a figure who spent his time parked outside Jerusalem just waiting for people to come to him. He went into where the people were, and he dwelt amongst the people. That's what Emmanuel, that verse we'd have heard over Christmas, means, God with us. Jesus came and dwelt amongst people. He didn't sort of distance himself from them all the time. He did at times, but that was to pray. And in this article said we need, if we're going to affect what we see on our TV screens, if we're going to change what we hear on our radios, if we're going to change the culture of tabloid newspapers, it's no good shouting from the sidelines as Christians saying, this has got to change. You go and get involved like Jesus did. You go and get into these places. We need Christian presenters. We need Christian cameramen and women. We need Christian editors and producers and journalists. And I was like, wow. I've literally prayed half an hour ago, and I'm reading this. This is the green light. And that was the moment at which I thought, this is what I'm supposed to do. I'm going after this. But to cut a long story short, in terms of getting Blue Peter, it was 2 failed attempts, a letter back after sending the trailer in saying, thanks, but no thanks. Keep your details on file. If you've ever had one of those letters, they're not really keeping your details on file, because when I got the job eventually, I know where those tapes went, and it wasn't into a filing cabinet. That's as much as I'm saying. And I'd kind of given up. I was working in Selfridges in London for 2 years, selling suits after university. So not really what I imagined life is going to be like after university, but I needed to kind of fund living in London, because even back then it was quite expensive. I was doing a runner's job at a radio station called LBC. I used to do running at CBBC on a Sunday morning and a Saturday morning if I wasn't on Selfridges duty on that Saturday, trying to get a foot on the ladder. I had an audition to be a children's BBC presenter, didn't get it. And I just felt that I wasn't probably ever going to land it. And we'd got past the 3 years. And I don't think that was a 3 years. I think God's timing, as we often hear, is very different to ours. But I'd kind of got to the end of my tether, and I was now working for Steve Chalk at the Oasis Trust. And I'd given up. I'd thought that was it. And I need to now find what I'm supposed to do. But I just can't be in an office for the rest of my days. So I was thinking about reprising my gardening business from when I finished my A-levels. And then something happened, and I remember this Sunday morning in October of 1998, a friend just texted me on my mobile, before smartphones, the old Nokia, said, go to the newsagents now and get the news of the world. Not normally the newspaper I used to read, but he said, go and get it. I said, okay. He said, you'll understand why. And the front cover was a story about their presenter on Blue Peter, Richard Bacon, who'd been caught taking Class A drugs on a night out. And I looked at that and thought, he's history. If that's true, there's no way that someone can stay on a program like Blue Peter with that. And within 24 hours, he'd gone, he'd been sacked. And a lovely Christian woman at Oasis came up to me, who'd been a presenter herself in local news for many years before this job, and she came up to me and said, you've got to go for it. And I was like, I don't want the disappointment. And I'd presented on this charity video, and I thought, okay, I'm going to give it one last go. And I put my package together, put my CV in, and I remember in Kennington, where the office was at the time, I was just about to post it into this letterbox. And I just said, God, please, if this is what you said to me all those years ago you wanted me to do, please may this be it. Amen. Bash. And a few weeks later, I'm in TV Centre having an interview.
Wow.
Which is amazing.
Nice. Yeah. And you were at Blue Peter for how long?
6 years.
Wow.
6 years, yeah. Wow. Amazing.
Anyone watch Simon on Blue Peter? Oh, look at that.
That's better than the book.
They're in the middle.
Better than the book
Better
sales.
than the book,
yeah.
Better than the book.
But let's just say Blue Peter's slightly happier than the content in that book.
Favourite presenters of Blue Peter?
No, that's not fair. That's not fair.
I was a big fan of Diane Louise Jordan.
Oh, she's a great, great girl.
Met her once, she was lovely.
She is. She's really good.
Now, Oasis, you met Gemma at Oasis, is that right? Your first wife?
No, so I bizarrely, she ended up working for Oasis.
Right.
So I was on Blue Peter by this point. So I ended up sort of falling into working for Oasis's PR department for a bit. Yeah. I hated it. I was so bad at it. Ringing up journalists and asking them to cover a story on the Mothers Union wasn't really my bag. But I did end up doing things like that. And then I go to Blue Peter, and I've been there a few months, and she ended up doing the job that I was doing.
Right.
And it wasn't until we met at my old boss, her current boss's summer party later that year that I bumped into her for the first time. So our paths hadn't crossed at Oasis, but we had Oasis as our kind of common ground. We'd both done the same job, which was a bit bizarre, really.
Yeah. And tell us a bit about that, because I remember reading in your book about you being on Blue Peter, and she was quite jealous of the job that you had as you travelled across the world and stuff. Tell us a bit about meeting Gemma.
So we met at this party and we sort of started dating. It was the days of sort of writing down numbers and not just putting it straight into your phone. And I broke the house rule. I shared a house with a couple of other lads, and I broke the rule of not texting within the first 24 hours. I did, but you know, you've got to strike while the iron's hot, you know, because sometimes you miss out if you wait too long. So we'd started dating, and so she'd only ever known me in that role as a Blue Peter presenter. Yeah. And, you know, lots of really good moments to it, but it's actually quite hard for her as well at times. I remember vividly one summer, and this is why the job was just so incredible, because you often didn't know what was coming next in terms of, you obviously knew when the shows were going to be, Monday, Wednesday and Friday, you know which shows you were going to be on. But in terms of the films that goes into those shows and the different foreign trips you would do as part of that, you never quite knew what was coming next. Yeah. I knew that after our summer holiday in France, so we spent 2 weeks down in the south of France, we'd been with friends for the first week, and then the second week we sort of made our way back up the coast of France to get the ferry. And we were on the last day in Aramanche, near to the ferry port, to come home, and it's a lovely afternoon. We're having ice cream on the promenade. She already knows that a week after I get back, my first assignment back at work is basically flying to Belize for 2 weeks. And Belize is a tiny country, you know, that's kind of little leg that joins North and South America. It's kind of there near the Caribbean. Nice. Never been there in my life, but I knew as part of it I was going to be, because I was the only one on Blue Peter who'd been trained as a diver, I was going to be diving something called the Blue Hole. I mean, if you've never seen it, Google it later. It's the most remarkable thing. In the middle of the ocean out from Belize is this horseshoe of kind of coral, and then there's this amazing cave that you swim down into. It's incredible. So I knew I'm going to dive that. I've got this amazing foreign trip to Belize. And she's going back to work for the Electoral Commission by this point. She's working for the Electoral Commission by this point. So Monday morning, she's back in London. She enjoyed the job. I've got another week off, and then my first day back at work is getting on a plane at Heathrow and flying to Belize. As we're sat there eating our ice cream, so understandably, she's getting the kind of going back to work blues, and I can understand that. I'm thinking, I'm really looking forward to this trip. This is going to be great, but I'm playing it down. Anyway, my phone goes, and I can see it's the name of one of our producers at Blue Peter. I said, I probably ought to take it. She said, no, it's fine. So I said, hi, Catherine, how are you? Yeah, it's fine. And she cut straight to the chase. She said, have you heard about this film called Finding Nemo? I said, no. Basically, it's this massive new Disney Pixar film that's coming out in the next few months. And she quickly explained what the film is. She said, it's based on this fish that lives on the Barrier Reef in Australia. And already my antenna of excitement and hope is beginning to build. And she said, look, I'm really sorry this is late notice, because I know you're already going to Belize, but you're the only one we can do this film with. We basically need to make a film next week. I'm like, in Australia. We need you to go and dive the Barrier Reef. I mean, inside, I'm doing cartwheels. Gemma's sat there dreading going back to work, and I'm thinking, I'm just being tasked if I would mind going to Brisbane next week for 6 days. And 4 of those days will be diving the Barrier Reef for 4 days. And I was like playing it out. Yeah, that sounds great. I did text Catherine later that day. Sorry I sounded so unenthusiastic, but this was not playing out well. Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, that sounds great. Yeah, passport's all up to date. Fine. Yeah, diving certificate's all up to date. Great. Put the phone down. And I remember Gemma just looking at me and going, where are you going now? And I went, yeah, I'm going to Brisbane. And she went, when? Monday. And it was hard because, you know, on one side, they're pleased for you, but their reality is very different to what you're living. I lived for 6 years in this slightly unrealistic world of Blue Peter, where you are just doing bonkers things like that. Yeah. But back home, life's just sort of very normal. You know, we're dating like any normal couple do. I'm living with my slightly grubby housemates in Wimbledon, and life's very normal, but the work life you're leading is very abnormal, because how many jobs are there in a world where someone rings up and says, can you get on a plane to Brisbane on Monday and dive the Barrier Reef for 4 days? So
it's not happened to me yet.
No.
I'm waiting.
It's not really
it won't happen.
Church remit,
No, Jerry's
is
not
it?
letting it. I've got a sabbatical coming soon.
Well, there you go.
If you could drop me a phone call.
There you go. Yeah, it's well worth it.
So let's talk a little bit. Let's talk some more about Gemma. Most of your book is about Gemma, and you write some really beautiful things about her, and the marriage that you had and the way that she supported you. For someone like yourself, for someone outside of your world, we might perceive the world as being easy, but you've had lots of struggles that I was unaware of. Outside of grief and bereavement, which perhaps we're more familiar with, but some of the other struggles that you share in your book, with alcohol and with depression and anxiety. One of the things that really touched me about what you'd written in your book was about the way Gemma just loved you and supported you. She was your rock. Tell us more about her and your relationship with her.
Well, I often think relationships are really forged often in the fire of adversity. For some couples it can work the other way, and it kind of something that pushes them apart. But often when you go through tough things together, it can really bring you together in terms of understanding how each other works and understanding how you go about supporting each other. And we had largely a fairly straightforward first few years together, and we had Ethan 4 years after we got married in 2009. And amazing blessing. We'd always wanted kids, and it was just I was at Sky by this point, doing the kind of football league for Sky. So life was really, really good, and Ethan was such a massive blessing, and we loved having a little kid. She was a great mum, and we wanted more kids. So a sort of year or so later, we start thinking about a brother or sister for Ethan. And to cut a long story short, we didn't get anywhere, and we got to that stage where you start going for tests, and I went for tests, and I was okay. And I remember one afternoon I was at Sky doing Sky Sports News, I think, that day, and I can remember getting a call from Gemma, and she's very, very tearful on the phone, and she'd had her results back, and they were really bad, like in terms of there was pretty much no chance without intervention of having any more kids. She had a very, very low egg count for her age, and she's in her sort of mid-30s at this point. So it was an absolute hammer blow. And we had lots of sort of heart-to-hearts about it and chatted it through with friends and prayed about it. And we felt that we wanted to try the IVF route. And I don't know if anyone's been through IVF in this room, and probably some people have been. It's an amazing thing, but also a really harsh thing, because it's very black and white, and actually the failures outweigh the successes. But hope is such a huge driver for a couple who want another baby or want their first baby. It's huge. So obviously people will go down that route, and when it succeeds, it's utterly amazing. And it didn't succeed for us. The first time it failed completely, then the second time it did work, and she fell pregnant, and for a month we kept it very, very quiet, and then we began to tell a few more people, and then really sadly about 2 months later she miscarried, and at that point we knew that was kind of it. The emotional impact of going through something like that is huge, and we couldn't take it anymore. We know friends who've gone through 6 or 7 and still got nowhere, and then others who've been through 6, 7, 8 have finally, it has finally worked. But we, from an emotional point of view, and actually we didn't want to spend the whole of life craving something else, when right here we had an amazing little boy, and that was important to put our focus back on him. I just didn't deal with it very well. I think, without being too kind of broad in terms of what I'm saying about men don't tend to deal with things like this particularly well, because we're not brilliant at opening up about how we're feeling. We tend to kind of lock our feelings in here somewhere. My counsellor described it as kind of going into your cave as a man. You kind of retreat into the cave, and bit by bit, without all necessarily realizing you're doing it, you begin to kind of cut yourself off from people. And I went into quite a dark place over that period, and really, really struggled with depression for the first time. And it was really hard for her, because of course she's going through her own disappointment. She's going through her own grief. It might have only been 2 months, but for me that's a life that's been lost. So she's grieving what might have been. And it's just really, really tough, really, really tough. But I think it did bring us closer together, and that meant that when I had my second, much more pronounced brush with mental health difficulties, she was able to be such a supportive figure, because she kind of been there before with me. She'd been through her own stuff. And I'd been fine for actually quite a number of years after that. I'd kind of got back on an even keel. I think one of the biggest things for me was kind of working through and praying through getting rid of bitterness. I was really bitter and angry for quite a while, because this is a really difficult part of life for people when it doesn't work, because unless you are going to socially extricate yourself from all friends, it's quite hard not to see a developing bump. You know, you will see your friends' good news stories, because often we don't see the stories behind them. We just assume it's all been very straightforward for them, but actually there may be a story behind them as well. But you will have friends for whom it's very, very easy, and it just seems to happen. I've got friends for whom they could actually sort of build their calendar around when they got pregnant. And I used to say, you're incredibly lucky and blessed to be able to do that, because lots can't. Yeah. And letting go of that bitterness was really hard. Letting go of that kind of feeling that God had let us down and God wasn't interested in giving us what we really wanted. But actually, I think God was reminding us, look, what you've already got. Yeah. We spend too much of life craving things we think we need and not loving and enjoying the things we already have. And so I'd been all right for a time, because I'd managed to let that bitterness go, and I was at peace with the world. I was at peace with no more kids. It was fine, and I'm just going to put all my energy into loving this boy as best I can. And then I'd got the amazing gig of presenting the Premier League at Sky. So I did the Football League for years. I even covered, I was saying this to the guys earlier, I covered the 2015 Championship playoff semi-final between Ipswich and Norwich. It was the toughest gig I've ever done, because I knew the Ipswich fans were absolutely furious that a Norwich fan was presenting it, but it was my job. I mean, I did say to the producer, when I could see the possibility this might happen. So I was looking at the league table of that season. I kept saying, I think we might meet them. I don't think we're going to get automatic. I think it could be Ipswich Norwich. Would I have to present it? He went, yes, you will. Okay, and lo and behold, they got each other. I mean, you know, it went so far as that someone went on my Wikipedia page and photoshopped an Ipswich shirt onto my Sky suit. I mean, it was amazing. We got the better on that occasion, and I had to present the final against Middlesbrough, which again was very testing. And after that, I ended up doing the Premier League at Sky. So my plan would have made the move from Blue Peter into sport. That was my next big ambition, was to eventually move all the way up to doing Premier League football. That was kind of the dream. Yeah. Did I think I was going to get there? I didn't know, but I was going to give it everything I'd got. And I eventually got, in the 2015-16 season, the chance to present it. Yeah, that's right. And it was an amazing first season. I loved it. I found the level of scrutiny quite hard. It's very different to presenting Football League. With the best will in the world, Football League clubs are not covered in anything like the same way that the Premier League is. The Premier League is kind of this huge monster that sits above the football pyramid. It's, you know, and I have my issues with that. Yeah. But you open your newspapers this morning, and if you go to the sports pages, they will be 80% Premier League, and then a little few mentions of the Championship, tiny few mentions of League One, and very little on League Two, and probably nothing on the National League. Yep. So it's a huge amount of interest in it. And going from the Football League to the Premier League, I found really hard, because that scrutiny felt really intense. Suddenly every word you uttered, the way you asked questions was scrutinised by everybody. There was always that kind of, is he being biased against Liverpool? Was he being too biased towards Manchester United? And your social media column on Twitter, as it was back then before it became the, whatever it is now. But there would be hundreds in your column, so like hundreds of comments. Wow. And I eventually learned not to look at them, because I just knew you can't please everybody. There'll always be someone you've offended. Even if you've had the best day, someone will find reason to get annoyed and angry with you. Football fans are very tribal. And some people take it too far, as we've seen what's happened with Michael Oliver the last few days. It's absolutely disgusting what's happened. You know, for me, he's made a mistake, but he's a man, he's a human being, and he's getting death threats. That's utterly ridiculous, but I digress. But I went into the second season on the Premier League, and I think what had happened is, I think that scrutiny, that feeling of pressure, I probably wasn't really recognising the impact that was having on me mentally. And we go into the 2017-18 season, and the first few weeks were fine, and then I remember just waking up one morning, and I was doing a League Cup game that night down in Swansea. Yeah. I felt dreadful. I felt just this horrid anxiety within me. It just felt like a knotted stomach. I felt just so unsure of myself all of a sudden. Suddenly I've got this kind of voice saying, you can't do this. Everything tonight is going to be an absolute disaster. If you've been through, and there will be people here who've been through it and are probably going through it right now, anxiety suddenly begins to rock the foundations on which your life and your career and your family is built on. It feels like everything that felt sure is suddenly now feeling very, very unsure. Just this weird thing had come into me called anxiety. And I went down to Swansea that night and the train that afternoon for the evening game, and I was an absolute mess. I was going to the loo all the time. I was talking to myself on the train saying, you can do this. And this whole thing got progressively worse over the next few weeks. The anxiety built, and then it became panic attacks. And the last time I ever did a game for Sky, before I came away, was that season. And we were on a Saturday morning, and we were doing Tottenham away to Manchester United at Old Trafford. Yeah. And it was late September, early October, and I felt terrible going up there. And I remember vividly this moment as I was on the train, and I was such a mess. And I just was texting a girlfriend, not a girlfriend, a girlfriend of mine who's an amazing Christian woman. She's like just one of these kind of, I would describe them as prayer warriors. She just loves praying for people. And she knew I was struggling. She just texted me, anything I can pray for today? I said, I just pray that somehow I'll get through this because I don't think I can do it. Don't think I can do it. And she just said, I'm praying right now that you just know God's there with you in it. And I went to the loo, and as I was coming out the loo of this Virgin train that's plundering northwards, I looked out the window at these fields flying past, and there, right in the middle of this field, totally randomly, was this cross. Wow. And I thought, my goodness me. Again, people might say amazing coincidence, but hang on a minute, my friend has just been praying for me. There's a cross, there's a reminder. It didn't make it easier because I got there, I didn't sleep that night, but I knew somewhere inside all of this, God was somehow in the mess that I was now in. Yeah. Didn't sleep a wink the next morning. I get to Old Trafford, the weather matched my mood. It was raining, as it often does in Manchester. And I arrived at the ground, arrived at the outside broadcast truck that is sat in the car park to have the production meeting. We were on air at 11:30, kick-off at 12:30. And I was a mess. I didn't hear anything my producer was telling me. We've got an hour-long build-up, loads of graphics, loads of talking points, lots of things to remember. Normally I can remember them. I'm like, literally, it's going through my head because my head's like, it just felt like it was like jelly. And I get up to the studio and I'm sat there and I'm in the studio with Graham Souness and Jamie Redknapp. Again, I'm computing nothing they're saying. I can just feel this panic beginning to build, and we're half an hour from on air. 20 minutes from on air, it's getting really bad. Like my breaths are getting really rapid and shallow, and I can just feel my heartbeat going through the roof. And I've got to get out of here just for a few minutes. I can't do this show like this. And I ran out, literally out the studio. I said, sorry guys, just got to go to the loo. Pre-match nerves. A bit of that, just so they didn't guess anything was up. And right next to the studio at Old Trafford is unfortunately a really busy bar. And the loo's at the other side of the bar. But I knew in the corner was a disabled loo. Yeah. And I know I shouldn't normally use it, but if I could get there, I knew I'd be away from people if it was free. I sort of put my head down and got across the bar without getting spotted. It's vacant. And just shut the door. And I just sat on the floor and sobbed. And I just like, I cannot do this. Wow. Cannot do this. And look at my watch, I'm on air in 10 minutes. Who's going to sit in that seat if I don't do it? So I rang Gemma. Just thought, I've got to ring her. And I said, what do I do? And she said, well, firstly, you've got to tell your producer they need to know what's going on. They need to know what's going on. And she said, I'm just going to pray. And she prayed a really powerful prayer that God would just somehow give me the courage and the energy to get back to my feet, and that I would get through it. Yeah. I would get through it. And I did. And interestingly, many weeks later, when I chatted to the head of football at Sky, after everything else after that had happened, and he said, having heard my story on what was happening that day, he said, I watched that game back. He said, if anything, your performance was even higher than normal. And I know that's God, because that wasn't possible. 15 minutes before, I'm a wreck in a disabled loo at Old Trafford. And then I've got my head of football a few months later saying, that's one of your strongest performances. That's not possible. No. But I believe through my God and my Saviour, everything's possible.
It's an amazing story, isn't it? And Gemma's diagnosis, was that a similar kind of time that you went through?
It was incredibly awful, bizarre time. So a week later, I came away from Sky. I tried to work again on a midweek show, and the anxiety was so bad that she ended up ringing my boss and just said, he can't come in today. Yeah. And actually, they were brilliant. I didn't expect this to be their response. I don't know what I expected their response to be, but it was one of understanding. I felt it was going to be, look, give him a few days and we'll get him back for a game in a couple of weeks or a week's time. That was what I feared.
Yes.
But actually they just said, look, we want to do everything to help Simon get back to a place where he can do his job again, so we're going to support him. That was a massive relief. If you go through mental health struggles, the most important thing, whether it's your friends, whether it's your family, whether it's your church, whether it's your place of work, is that people listen and they understand and they don't judge and they don't condemn, but they listen. Listen. That was the biggest weight off my shoulders when I realized they were listening to what I was going through. They weren't trying to come up with quick remedies. And so I felt a sense of relief at that moment. Right, I'm going to get myself better. So that was the kind of, was right. Right, now we need to focus on me. Let's get me counselling. So I began counselling straight away because I've always found that really helpful. It doesn't help everybody, but it's really helped me down the years. And I did go on medication. Again, doesn't always help everybody, but it's been something that I've found beneficial. Yeah. And we're starting to sort of go down the road of thinking about, when I might go back. But amidst all that, and Ethan is 8 by this point, Gemma's 40. She turned 40 in the May of that year. She just starts feeling a bit ropey, starts getting these headaches, and we didn't really think much of them at the time, but they kind of start to recur more and more, and they're starting to last longer across the day. And it was such a confusing period because I was still struggling. I was on the road to recovery, but I was still struggling, not in a great place. I'm not seeing things very clearly. No. And this is mid-November of 2017. Yeah. And she just got steadily worse and steadily less able to do things, much more kind of fatigue. And we'd been to the doctors a couple of times because she had a history of insomnia after having Ethan. And often that happens to particularly mothers, that it can really disrupt the sleep for a long, long time. So for many, many years, she'd really struggled with insomnia. Yeah. And her doctors felt it was probably that and the stress of seeing me. Because, of course, she was stressed. We share in good, healthy, loving relationships the burdens of each other. That's what we're called to do. That's what the marriage vows are about, being there for each other in the good times and the bad times. We carry each other's burdens. She was carrying the burden of me as well as, will he go back to doing what he loves? If he doesn't, what does that mean for him? Mm-hmm. Actually, what does it mean for us as a family? Where are we going to live? What are we going to do? So he felt, the doctor, she was very stressed, and that was a mixture of that and the insomnia was making her feel quite unwell. Second time we go back and she's even worse than the time before. And again, he just thinks it's that, just rest up. And that was over this weekend that she rested up, but she was so bad over that weekend. She doesn't really ever get out of bed because she's too tired to move. I took Ethan to see Paddington 2 just to amuse him for a little bit. And by the Monday evening of that penultimate week in November 2017, she'd got so bad and she was sick in the afternoon. We thought, this is really bad. And it was only on the Friday that a doctor had looked us both in the eyes and said, there's nothing seriously wrong with her, she just needs to rest. And by that Monday night, we were in accident emergency in Reading, where we were living at the time. And I'm sure there's people in this room who've been in a similar position. Well, I know there are because of the people we've heard from already. When that moment comes that you can kind of sense it's coming. She had loads of blood tests, and you could just sense something from the faces of the doctors and the nurses who were treating her that evening, that there was going to be bad news at some point, just didn't know what. Yeah. But I kind of sensed it. I was trying to be upbeat for her. And then in the small hours, the doctor comes in, sits down and says, I'm really sorry, but she's got an aggressive form of blood cancer. We don't know which strain. Mm-hmm. There are lots of different strains of blood cancer, so it's quite hard to immediately diagnose which one it is, but, she's got cancer. It's like, your world feels like in that moment it's been shattered. Yeah. And it feels a little bit like your kind of life is cartwheeling out of control. Like, that's what it felt like that night. Mm. And by the next day, we are being taken in an ambulance from Reading to Oxford to a specialist hospital there. Yeah. And that afternoon, she was diagnosed with this rare form of blood cancer called acute myeloid leukemia that affects around about 3,000 in the UK every year, but it's incredibly difficult to treat. Thankfully, actually, since what happened to Gemma, it has steadily got better. The work of Blood Cancer UK that I'm president of has been amazing, and it is beginning to change the outcome for people, thankfully. But back then it was pretty grim. Yeah. And we were given a 50% chance on that Tuesday afternoon that she would live. And, as Christians and as people trying to be optimistic in a really horrible situation, you go for the 50% she's going to be okay. Yeah. We know this is going to be a long road back, and it's going to be many months, maybe longer, of dealing with this and this new reality that our lives is going to have, but she'll pull through. Yeah. But she didn't.
And you had friends around you, didn't you? In your book, you talk about friends that you had friends advise you to get kind of some medical support for Gemma. I remember you writing about that, and you had friends around you who were kind of praying with you.
Yeah, it's one of those days when you look back on it. So I was only with her for 3 nights, the Tuesday, Wednesday, and the Thursday nights, and I slept in this sort of slightly uncomfortable. It's a bit like this. This is comfortable, but it wouldn't be comfortable for sleeping.
No, I agree.
A bit like this. I just sort of slept like this every night. Terrible neck ache by the end. But on the Thursday night, she went very strange overnight, and by the early hours of the morning, I could sense something was not right because her consultant came in at 6 in the morning. I'm like, and he had that look on his face again, and suddenly she's off heading down on the bed to be scanned. And you sit in a room at 8 o'clock in the morning, one of those family rooms on the ward, and it was just me. It's just me. I'm just sat there with her doctor, and I'm thinking, what on earth is going on? But I'd know that face. I've seen that face before. Yeah. I know this isn't going to be good. And he just looked at me and said, I'm so sorry. She's had a complication that is causing multiple bleeds inside her head. There is nothing we can do. Yeah. And I'm like, so what are you saying? Yeah. And he said, she won't see out the day. And you are then in the situation of like, well, what do I do with Ethan? Like, he'd been in to see her once, knew obviously mum's seriously ill, but he's 8. How much does the 8-year-old need to know? How much do they understand? What do I do about him? He did come in, which was incredibly hard because I didn't want to say mum's going, but I just wanted her to have that final moment with him, even though she was unconscious. And just over the course of that day, along with her family, just some amazing Christian friends gathered around her bed. And I did, as a Christian, I prayed probably for around about 3 hours that God would save her. Yeah. I did. Everything I've been told, it was impossible she was coming back from this. Impossible. Yeah. But with God, all things are possible. That's what I believe, and I still believe it to this day. They really are. Yeah. And my prayer was the same. Please don't leave Ethan without a mum. That was it. It wasn't about me. No. I knew it was going to be hard for me, but my biggest heartbreak was him. It was like, please, God, please don't leave him without a mum. And I just felt by kind of 3 o'clock that afternoon that prayer was not going to be answered. And then the rest of the day was just about being alongside her and being with friends, with tears and sharing stories. Yeah. Because realistically, she probably heard none of it, but they do say that sometimes people, even in those catastrophic situations, do hear something. The hearing's one of the last things to go. Yeah. So we felt it was important as she left at the wrong time in life that she heard how much she was loved, how much Ethan loves her, how much we loved her. Yeah. And it was painful, but there was also, as you look back on it, there was also something special about it as well. It feels weird to say that, but that was God being in the room with us. He wasn't going to answer that prayer, and I will never understand it, and I've long let go of the need to understand it, but I know he was with us in that room that day.
It's just hard to imagine what you've been through. You then move into a period of grief.
Yeah.
And as I was reading your book, there was the moment I cried was when I read the story of you telling Ethan, returning home from Oxford.
Yeah.
And having the courage to then go and speak to your son. Yeah. And tell him what had happened.
Yeah, I mean, that's probably the only moment I look back on and still struggle to kind of go there. Yeah. Because he'd come in that time, and my family had all come with his cousins, and he spent most of the day playing at this amazing centre called Maggie's next door, which is a charity that's set up in memory of someone who died of cancer for families to have a nice place to go. Right. Beautiful building at this church hospital in Oxford. So he spent much of the afternoon, and then they eventually took him back. Yeah. Some friends. And we left the hospital after a couple of hours, and the whole way back, I feel sick, not just at what's happened, but because I know what's coming. Yeah. I know it's on me. I have to tell him. Listen, I could have passed it to maybe his granny, Gemma's mum, and said, can you please tell him? But I'm his dad. It has to be me. And I just felt sick. I thought, I cannot even begin to imagine how this is going to feel for him and for me. And I remember on the way back, because we hadn't eaten all day, understandably. Food's not exactly going to be large on your list of priorities in a day like that. And we saw the kind of glowing arches of McDonald's on the way back from Oxford to Reading. And my mate said, do you want to get something? I said, yeah, I just need something. And so he kind of pulled in. And people who've lost loved ones will probably understand this and kind of recognize this, that kind of parallel universe. When something like this happens, you feel like you're launched out of the world that you are still physically in, but emotionally and mentally you're not there anymore. And the world doesn't really make sense because it's just carrying on. And suddenly you find yourself in a really, really hard and barren and painful place, but life's still happening around you. And so we pulled up. It probably, in hindsight, would have been better to go for the drive-through option. But I think from memory it was busy, so we just got out and we walked into this McDonald's, and there is the thriving noise of a Friday night at McDonald's, midway between Reading and Oxford. Why wouldn't it be? They don't know. They don't. I mean, maybe one or two might have known me from my TV jobs, but they absolutely don't know what's just happened. Kids are all playing on those annoying iPad things. People are getting frustrated with those machines where you order your food because you can't speak to anyone anymore. But I digress again. And I remember just this surge of anger welling up inside me. Yeah. I just wanted to shout out, do you just not know what's happened? My wife's just died. I'm going back to tell my son, who's 8, and you're all having a lovely Friday night. But it's not their fault. They don't know. Why would they know? And it's a really hard thing. I found it a very hard thing to deal with for weeks on end, that parallel universe where you're getting on with life, the school run, the going to the shops to get food, all the normal things, but you just don't feel part of the physical world anymore, not mentally and emotionally. And as we got back in the car, I just remember as we came back into the drive where the house was, and just, I felt sick. And I just thought, I can't delay it. When I came in, he was playing on the PlayStation with his cousin Thomas, and he was going, Daddy, how's Mummy? And I'm like, And I just grabbed him and took him upstairs. And I can't really go there, but I told him. And it was I hope I never have to, ever have to do anything like that again. Never, ever. To see the physical crumpling of an 8-year-old it's utterly horrendous. It was the worst moment.
Tell us some of your experiences of grief and how you lived with grief and some of the experiences that you had. And one of the things I found interesting in reading your book was you wrote about Ethan and his experiences of grief. And there's not a comparison, but it was interesting reading, how an adult experiences grief and how an 8-year-old experiences grief and the differences. And some of the experiences you had, and the way one thing that struck me in a positive note was the way that people kind of gathered around you, the support that you got from people. Some of the disappointment related to that as well. Some people going missing, perhaps, in that season. Just tell us a bit about that.
Yeah, I mean, the hard thing I found was, as well as dealing with your own pain of the loss of your other half, was it was really unbridled fear, because suddenly everything's on you. And all these questions just come at you at 1,000,000 miles an hour all the time. What happens about this? How's this going to work? If you go back to work, who looks after Ethan on a Saturday? It's just utterly relentless. But I was told a very useful analogy early on, because what I didn't understand is I don't understand what's going on with Ethan. And none better than a demonstration than that first Saturday morning after the dreadful Friday. I sort of come down in the morning. I've not slept at all. And Ethan is back on the PlayStation with Thomas, his cousin. I come down the stairs and I can hear them giggling and playing. And it sounds like a normal Saturday morning when his cousins have come to stay. Yeah. But the single biggest thing and the worst thing that's ever happened to me and him has just happened. It's not even been 24 hours. I don't get, how can he look so happy and normal? And then my sister calls them through for breakfast, and Thomas goes through first, and Ethan sort of starts to put his controller down. And as he walks up, you just see his eyes fill with tears. And he just comes over and gives me a big hug, and he said, Daddy, what happens on Saturdays? And I said, what do you mean? He said, well, you used to go to work to do football, and Mummy looked after me. What happens now? And I just said, look, this isn't the time. You don't need to worry about that. It will be okay. It will be okay. But in that one moment, that first morning, I got a demonstration of how a kid's grief works compared to an adult. For an adult, there's no escape. particularly when it happens at the wrong time in life and there's a loss of a parent, because, as I said, everything's suddenly squarely on your shoulders in terms of parenting. And I only had one child to parent. So that suddenly is all on you. So that's why there's no escape. Yeah. For a child, they basically talk about the puddle analogy. When you were a kid and you loved jumping in puddles in your Wellington boots, yes, his parents are like, oh, for goodness sake. But in the same way that you can jump into a puddle that they would say represents pain, that represents the pain of loss, in the same way they jump into that puddle of pain, they then can jump out of it again, which is why 1 minute they can be larking and laughing and just playing normal, and the next minute they're on their knees in tears, and then they're fine again. And once I learnt that, it became easy to understand, because I found that really difficult, particularly over Christmas, because we had Christmas coming down the tracks at us very quickly after that. Of course. And it was just, I found it so hard, Christmas. But for him, I wanted it to be, wasn't going to be normal, but I wanted it to be as good as it could. And dealing with that over Christmas, hearing the laughter of the cousins, but you're in just this horrible place. But we were very fortunate. I really do see this as God's blessing, the way in which we had an amazing kind of group of people around us who were there for many weeks after she went, just supporting us and loving us and looking after the practical things. And that's such a big help. If you're ever wondering, how do I go about supporting a friend who's just gone through loss? You know, if you can't offer that emotional support, and not everybody can, be practical. Yeah. You know, just lifting some of the load really, really does help massively. And I found that so helpful. But yeah, I look back on it and just see, you know, when you're asking where was God in this and faith and how that all plays out, I was incredibly angry at God for a long time. Yeah. Like, seriously angry at him. Like, why had he allowed this to happen? Why didn't he not answer that prayer? Where are you, God? I felt like God wasn't anywhere anymore. Yeah. Just felt like he'd gone silent. It felt like my faith was in tatters. That it just none of it made sense anymore. And I was a number of times quite close to giving up on faith. I just thought, I got tired of Christians saying it will all make sense one day. I'm like, I want it to make sense now, because it doesn't. Yeah. Like, why would you leave a child without a mum? That doesn't make any sense. But I learned to get to a place of knowing it's okay to be angry with God. It is okay. Read your Bible, read the Old Testament. There's a lot of very angry people with God. God is big enough to take our anger, and it's okay. It's okay to be angry. And I remember one morning specifically where it was kind of a game changer for me in terms of going forward from that moment 7 years ago. And it was the Saturday after the funeral on the Thursday. And for those of you who've been through loss, that's really when the reality of what's happened hits. Because there tends to be an inevitable momentum that takes you through the first few weeks, particularly with preparing the funeral, if you want it to be something you have a certain amount of control over how it is and what the service looks like. And having all those people around, felt there was kind of a period where you kind of get carried through, and then it comes and goes. People have got to kind of go back to work, back to their families, back to the usual rhythms of life, and you're kind of left. It wasn't like I was left on my own, but you're left in this place but my life is irrevocably changed now. Yeah. And it hits hard. It hits really hard, because it's like, this is it now. It might not always be like this, and obviously my story now, it definitely isn't, but right in that moment it feels like, well, this is it for me, and they've all gone back to their families. Yeah. Now it's just me and the boy. And I woke up really early one Saturday morning, and I was struggling to sleep. Sleep goes out the window with grief for a lot of people. And we lived very near the River Thames in London. It went past just beyond the end of our garden. And so I woke up and I sort of fussed around the house. I was about to say another word then. Fussed around the house. I mean, it wouldn't have been the worst word I could say in church, but I still didn't want to go there. I fussed around the house for a little bit and then thought, I'm just going to go out for a walk. It's about 7 by this point, so there's a little bit of light in December coming through, but not a lot. And through the murkiness, I sort of headed out in my dressing gown and Wellington boots. I couldn't be bothered to get dressed properly. Just put my dressing gown on and wandered down the little bit of communal land down to the Thames. And I just sat by this tree, and I could see, like, through the fog, see some of the joggers on the towpath the other side. Fortunately, they couldn't see me. And I just felt this kind of oppressive darkness around me that wasn't just the weather, and it wasn't just the time of the morning. I just felt in this incredibly dark, hopeless place where I just didn't really see hope anymore, didn't see really a point for living anymore. I knew deep down I had to live for Ethan, but in that moment I didn't want to live. And I had this fleeting moment where I thought, I'm going in, I'm done, I cannot do this, I can't do it, I don't have the strength. And immediately, thankfully, the face of Ethan was very prominent in my mind, and I knew I cannot do it, I can't orphan him through my own choice. His mum didn't have a choice. I have a choice to live or to give up. I can't give up. But I remember as I sat there, and again, people with no faith or a little bit doubtful about stuff will maybe listen to this and think, well, what do you expect? You're hallucinating. You're a broken man. You're a sleep-deprived man. Yes, I absolutely was sleep-deprived and I was broken. This is just a hallucination, a figment of the imagination. But it's what came after that for me it wasn't. As I sat there and the Ethan image went through my head, just had a really strong sense I wasn't alone. I remember sort of looking around. There's no one nearby, but it felt like someone was near. And as I looked to my left again, sat on this damp, grim bank by the River Thames, there is this man. And he's looking at me squarely in the eyes, like you are now, looking at me. And there's tears in his eyes. And as I looked at him, it felt like I was looking into the face of Jesus. There was an inescapable man looking at me. And I felt, as I kind of got to my knees, this strength. I felt in that moment that I knew that however difficult this was going to be, however long the next few years were going to be in terms of rebuilding life and finding life again, that this Jesus figure that I'd followed for years, the Jesus figure we've just celebrated the birth of just a few weeks ago, is going to walk with me. And this is the Jesus figure that I read about in the Bible that understood loss, the man who wept tears at the tomb of Lazarus, the man who had compassion on the broken and on those who had lost loved ones, the widows, the marginalized in society. He had huge compassion and love for. And I felt love and compassion in that moment that he did understand. Amazing. It might not have made sense, but he understood. And I just felt this surge of strength, and I got back to my feet, went back to the house. And from then on in, it was a tough path to traverse, but what made the difference was knowing he was in that walk. He was alongside me in that walk.
Amazing. An amazing story. And Simon, you talk about, I really encourage you to get Simon's book. I don't think you brought any with you, did you, Simon?
No. I've only got one copy at home. Looks a bit self-indulgent if you've got just a whole bookshelf of them.
But I encourage you to get it. It's a brilliant book. It's very raw. We were talking about it earlier together, weren't we? It's very raw, but I really encourage you to read it. And you talk about finding another plan A. And you're now married again.
Yeah.
Dorina.
Yeah.
You have 2 more children.
Tell
us about that.
I have a 2-year-old and a soon-to-be 9-month-old. So I'm straddling the parenting spectrum. I'll come on to that in just a moment. Listen, there was an amazing moment. I just want to tell 2 stories because I just want to encourage people because there's one bit I missed out because I know you were kind of hinting at it. I think when you go through something like this and when you look back in life, sometimes whatever you're going through, and if you are a person of faith, you're a Christian, you can't always see where God is at work in a present situation. But sometimes you look back and go, oh my goodness, he was in that situation. Actually, he did answer that prayer, but not quite in the way I expected. God absolutely was with me through all that period. One thing I started doing when Ethan went back to school after he lost his mum is I would put an encouraging note in his packed lunchbox every single morning. I'd put a little note in. Sometimes it was a Bible verse. Sometimes it was something from Winnie the Pooh. Sometimes it was even my own work. But it was something when he opened his lunch at lunchtime, if he was feeling a bit down or maybe a bit sad, it was just something to know that Dad's thinking about him, Dad's encouraging and cheering him on from afar. And I started taking photos of these, and I'd pop them up on Instagram every morning. And they became a little bit of a thing. If I didn't put them up, people would mess with me saying, where's today's snack note? I'm like, this is getting a bit weird now. But out of it, an amazing thing happened. A few weeks into that 2018, into that winter period after Christmas, where it's just really hard. Everything's really hard. It's a difficult time of year anyway. And my vicar in Reading, David Walker, messaged me one day and said, I've had this letter. I think you should read it. But I'm always a bit wary of people writing to you via the church. But I think this one you'll like. So he brings it round. And I read this letter. It's from a guy called Dan Ritchie. I've never met him in my entire life. Dan lives on a farm near Gloucester, just outside Ledbury, with his then 3 children and his wife, Kate. And on the farm, they run this kind of, it's basically a place where lots of Christian groups go and stay. It's called the Poplars. Amazing place. And he said, you don't know me. He said, but I've been reading your story and I just feel broken for you. We're Christians and we just feel broken for you. I just really, if you ever want to come and stay at the farm, he said, I know this sounds a bit weird if you don't know us, but you'd be very welcome if you want to get away from things. I thought, that's really nice. And so I wrote back to him and said, Dan, that's really, really kind. Thank you so much. We'd love to do that one day. I don't know when, but we'd just love to do that. Anyway, here's my number just to make it a bit quicker. And a couple of days later, he texted me and said, the boys want to say, he had 2 boys, and the boys have been talking about Ethan. They'd really like us to send him something. What's he into? I said, he's into Lego. Dad said, great, leave it with me. 3 days later, this massive box turns up at my house in Reading. And there's an amazing Lego railway set. It was just overly generous, but it was incredibly generous of him for Ethan. And then in there is this little fabric lunchbox, and it just said, for Dad, on a Post-it note on the top.
Nice.
Okay. So I opened it, and one half of it was just lovely sort of pretzels and crisps and peanuts and stuff. Oh, what a lovely guy Dan is. Give me some dad snacks. That's really kind.
Very tasty.
But I could feel something in the other half of it. So I opened up, and there are 12 amazing little bundles of cards, yellow cards about the size of a credit card, and they've been wrapped in green string. And on the top, it said, even dads need snack notes. Dan, a man I'd never met, had written me for every single day of 2018 my own word of encouragement.
Amazing.
I remember his wife saying to me, so we're now great friends with him, he was best man at my wedding along with Ethan to Dorina a few years back. His wife said he sat there for 2 days, pulling out verses from the Bible, amazing words from Christian songs, and some, like me with Ethan, just some other quotes as well. And when I look back now, I go, that's where God is. God works through people.
Yeah.
God, we are his agents in this world of bringing peace and love and the good news to other people. That's how he works, and he worked through Dan. So I look back on that and go, that's where God was during that really difficult time in 2018, and we were at theirs for New Year. They've just become amazing friends, and God has blessed us amazingly out of something really difficult with someone I feel like I've known my entire life, but I've actually only known for 7 years. But he's like one of my closest mates, someone I can always pick up the phone to, whenever.
Fantastic.
So, that was an amazing thing that happened. But really the kind of turning point for me, along with that river moment, was in the May of 2018. We decided to do, because on Gemma's 40th, we'd had a big garden party at our place. We had a nice big garden by the river. We were very blessed and fortunate. So we'd had a big garden party. It had been sunny. And I just had this idea to plant a tree in her memory in a little bit of communal land outside the house. I knew at this point I wasn't going to live there for much longer, but I wanted Ethan to have somewhere to come back to in years. And I thought a tree would be a great thing for him to come back to, something that represents life and that is growing each time he comes back to see it. And out of a really small idea, which was just to have a few friends on that day and to put some of her ashes beneath the tree, it suddenly became this massive party, because I just in a moment of madness said, let's do another garden party, let's make it. And end up with 300 people at our house.
Oh
I had an amazing group of people who helped, sort it out. We had a massive marquee. And after it all happened on the Sunday, I was just stood by her tree, and it was a beautiful, beautiful afternoon, very warm. And as the sun began to set that evening, I was sort of standing by it, and I was thinking back on the day before and how hard but lovely it had also been. And the phrase that had gone round my head time and time again over those first few months was second best, plan B. I'd been given a book that had been written about grief called Option B, which is not meant to say that life is just a pale reflection of what came before when this happens, but it's kind of, what's your other plan when plan A comes to an end? But I didn't like this idea that everything from now on is going to be a bit of a pale imitation of everything that went before. It's never, ever going to be the same again, because each and every one of us sat in this room tonight are utterly, utterly unique. There is no one like you anywhere else in this world, and that's another amazing thing about God's creation, the uniqueness of each and every one of us. So it can't be the same again, but I thought, why can't it be good again?
Yeah.
Why is everything now going to be plan B? Is the God that I believe in the God of plan Bs, or is he the God of second chances? He's the God of second chances.
Yeah.
He's the God who's interested in rebuilding lives out of wreckage. I often compare him, but he's the master craftsman, to the amazing men and women who work on the repair shop on BBC One, where broken pieces of furniture and family heirlooms get brought in, and this amazing team restore them to their former glory. God is in the business of restoring broken lives.
Yeah.
And I thought, I don't believe this. I don't want to believe this, that this is my life now. I don't want that for me. I definitely don't want that for Ethan, that now on everything's just going to be a little bit of a black and white version of what came before. I want to find life again. I want it to be good again in the knowledge that it will be different. And now I'm going to try and find it. That didn't mean it all happened overnight. But over the next few months and years, as I look back now, this God of rebuilding lives has absolutely rebuilt my life in ways that I never, ever imagined. Meeting someone like Dorina, it's hard getting alongside broken people. It really is. And it's very hard falling in love with someone who's broken. It's hard falling in love with someone knowing that there was someone who came before and there was no choice taken in that person no longer having that person alongside them. It's a very different dynamic to when someone has taken the decision to end a relationship. This was a decision that no one had any choice in. It just happened. That's a really hard space to come into. But Dorina's just been an incredible person in my life who for the first few weeks and months we got to know each other was just an amazing kind of someone to talk to. And I think the fact that she didn't know Gemma, obviously she'd heard about her, but there wasn't her own grief for a friend she'd lost, which some of my friends obviously struggled with. She was able to get alongside me, and she just struck up an amazing relationship with Ethan, really from the first time they met. And as kind of we went along, we kind of fell in love, and eventually it just felt right that God had brought this amazing person into my life, had blessed me again with another incredible woman. And we got married. Well, we were supposed to get married, and then COVID ruined it all, and we had to cancel it. And then, actually, I had a lovely story. Sorry to bring Norwich up again, but I love the way God works in mysterious ways. So I lost my dad during COVID. It wasn't too COVID, but we lost him, so it was a really hard period to lose him because 30 people at a funeral just was really, really difficult. But when we got married, we were getting married that Christmas. So the Christmas after the March, and we had to cancel it. We were getting married in Wales. And in the end, we thought, let's get married in Norwich the next summer when things open up again. But we had nowhere to get married because we didn't live in Norwich. We weren't from there. And I've got some friends of mine who run this amazing church in Norwich called Soul Church, called John and Chantel Norman. I'm very good friends with them. And I rang John and said, what can we do? What can we do? He said, give this person a ring at Cathedral and say who you are. So I did, rang up this very nice lady at the Cathedral and explained our situation. And she said, well, what's your connection to Norfolk? Because initially she wasn't very hopeful about this happening.
Had she not heard of you before?
No, well, I didn't go in with that because that's embarrassing. That's really embarrassing. It's not my style.
No, okay.
But I said, I was born in Norfolk, born in Norwich. She went, okay. Do you live in Norwich? No. So you don't go to church in Norwich? No. She went, it's not looking very likely. You can get married in the Cathedral. And I said, oh, but my dad was vicar. He was ordained in Norwich Cathedral, and he was vicar in Norfolk for 10 years. She went, right, we can send a letter to the Archbishop of Canterbury this afternoon. So we...
Wow,
so
nice.
We got married in the Cathedral, and the amazing thing was, it was like that was Dad's wedding present to us, because, of course, he never got to see that day, and it'll always be something I always feel sad about, but he had a good innings. But I look back on it and go... That's where God has been in all this. Yeah. That's where God has restored life. Yeah. If someone had said to me 7 years ago, in 7 years' time, you'll be sat in Ipswich, you'll be in a church, and you'll be talking about the way in which God has blessed you with love again, the way in which God has blessed you with two very busy but amazing children called Talitha and Theo, and that your son Ethan, who you thought would never recover from this, is developing into a wonderful young man, even through the difficult years of the teenage years, which are quite something to navigate, both as a teenager and as a parent. I've never done it before, so I say to Dorina, I have no idea why he's behaving like this. I've never parented a teenager either, Dorina. But I probably wouldn't have believed it.
Yeah.
But that is what I come back to. The God I follow is in the business of restoring lives. He's in the business of restoring broken lives and creating something beautiful out of something that can seem absolutely beyond hope. And it's about bringing hope into my life over the last few years, from something that felt utterly hopeless to now being someone who can sit here and feel how much God has infused that love and that hope and that life in my life again. Suggests to me there definitely is a God who's very interested in us.
So good. So good. Well, I, for one, am very grateful that you're still with us. And God is using you as a great ambassador for him. We're going to have some Q&As. Yeah, give Simon a little break, a little breather.
This could go one or two ways.
Have a Haribo. Well, do you know...
Well, I've been looking at it. I've thought this is a lovely dish of Haribo.
Dig in.
But how do you eat those during an interview?
Yeah.
I'm going to have one now, though.
Yeah, go for it. I can imagine there's some questions in here that I've just not asked you. Like, I want to know what Paul Merson is like, for example, you know?
Mad as a box of frogs.
Is he?
No, he's a great guy, but listen, he's had his own story.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So he's hard to get to know, but he's great. He's great to work with. He's passionate. And he was, you know, people of a certain generation will remember him as a player. He was
all right on Strictly, wasn't he? He did all right.
He did better on Strictly than we thought. I thought he'd be back week 2, but he got a little bit further.
He did all right.
Yeah.
Would anyone like to ask Simon a question?
You don't have to. I won't be offended.
Oh, there we go. Jerry, would you mind?
You only did it to get me off my feet.
I did.
That look in your eye.
In your own time, Jerry. Should have given him roller skates.
Yeah.
Hello. Okay. Firstly, I'm so sorry for everything that you've been through, but thank you so much for sharing everything that you have done. It's been really touching and powerful. So yeah, thank you so much for that. I've got 2 questions, if you don't mind. One on topic, one slightly off topic.
Yeah.
Firstly, you mentioned earlier, before applying for Blue Peter, you read a magazine about the need for Christians in the media, in various roles and whatnot. So I was wondering, in your current role on Soccer Saturday, do you find opportunity to disciple? Is there a space for Christianity in that world? And how does that look? Obviously, I'm not watching Sky Sports News 24/7, but I do watch it every day. But it's not obviously mentioned, and it's not.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not. So I wonder, from a Sky Sports perspective, how does that work? And like I said, is there an opportunity for you, not on air, but within the set? You know, is there an opportunity to disciple and whatnot? And secondly, for me, football number 1, darts number 2, bowls number 3.
Bowl? What, Crown Green bowls?
Yeah, like, you know, lawn bowls, indoor.
Lovely.
And, you know, yesterday we just had...
Big fan of David Bryant?
Well, everyone.
Back in the day, yeah, with the old pipe.
I'm a Stuart Anderson man myself, but yesterday was the World Bowls
I didn't
Championship
see it, so please don't ask me a question on it.
I won't.
No, go on.
But it's not mentioned on Sky Sports News, and I just wondered why bowls isn't mentioned, and how does that work in...
You did not see that question coming.
No, I'm going to say some 20 years of questions, and that is the biggest curveball I've ever been sent. Almost like a
nice
curving bowling ball.
Yeah.
The answer is I don't know. It's always hard for the lesser sports to get featured. I mean, you'll know this, Sky Sports News is largely football. Football is kind of God of that kind of channel. Actually, most channels now is mainly football. I've always felt, I think when I was first on it, there was more room for that kind of thing. It tends to be driven, if the media is very honest, by what they have the rights in terms of pictures for, because TV is a picture-led medium. Without the pictures, funnily enough, there's no TV. So they're less likely to show stuff where they haven't got the actual footage of it. That's one of the main reasons, because if you're talking about some amazing final in the bowls that everyone else has missed, well, the only way you can show people what they've missed is with the pictures, but they won't have the rights to those pictures. But also it will be seen as a lesser sport, not for you. I've quite enjoyed watching. I used to love playing with my dad at Cromer bowls, but that's largely why it will be. In terms of what you asked earlier, I found it really hard knowing how I'm supposed to be as a Christian within a public space.
Yeah.
And coming back to what I was saying about Blue Peter earlier, because the predecessors to me had been sacked in such a public way, there was a huge amount of interest in who was going to take over. Huge amount of interest. Who are they going to go for? Are they going to go for someone who's the antithesis of this, the antidote to the guy who's been taking Class A drugs? And so there was a lot of need to find out. I'd got given the job in late December 1998 after the audition. And I had to not tell anybody. The only people I could tell was my parents and my family. I couldn't tell close friends I'd got it. I could tell my boss at work, because obviously there were ramifications. I wasn't coming back in January, which was quite nice. But I couldn't really tell anyone else. And the news was going to be announced on the Friday in January ahead of my first show that Friday evening. And classic Daily Mail gets it a day early. Someone's said something somewhere. And all the Daily Mail has in terms of knowing who I was that I came from Norfolk. I was a man. I was born in Norwich. And I was a vicar's son and a Christian. That's all they had. But immediately, without even me taking the decision, did I want to be public about my faith or not? Bang, it was out there. The next morning, my dad's up the road in Beccles. I'm living in Brixton at the time. He's ringing me saying, I don't know what to do. I've got journalists on my doorstep. Because in the Church of England, I was talking to you about Crockford's earlier, wasn't I? The clerical dictionary, you can find the names and addresses of all the vicars in the country in the Church of England. At least you could, it may have changed now. So they easily found my dad's address. And they turned up, a News of the World reporter was on his doorstep asking my dad for a picture of Simon in a choir boy outfit. Never. Thankfully for everyone at church, I've never sung in a choir in my entire life. I was described by the Guardian newspaper the next day because I used to do something called a Scripture Union beach mission in Cromer that my dad used to run.
Hey, Southwold over here.
Hey, you the Southwold posse. Yay! Tony Berry. Yay! He used to go to my dad's church in Cheam. Yay! Right,
Wow.
Sorry, a bit of an in-joke happening here.
It's very niche.
Yeah,
Yeah,
so
very
very
niche.
niche. But my dad ran this mission. I ended up being a leader on it as well for a few years. Actually, I only finished a couple of years before I got Blue Peter. And they found out about that. I was described by The Guardian as a man who in the summer is found walking up and down the beaches of North Norfolk with a floppy Bible preaching at people. I was described as a Bible basher. So I found it really difficult because I hadn't asked for this. I knew that by going into the public domain, that wasn't my own decision. Obviously, I needed to be given the job, but I'd taken the decision to go for a job that would be done in public. So of course, it'd be naive of me not to think there's going to be an interest, but I had no choice. And when it was announced that I was a Christian, and I found it really hard because as I started it, there was this kind of almost feverish excitement within the Christian church within this country about this. We've got this young guy who's replaced the guy who got sacked for drugs, and he's called Simon. His dad was a vicar, and he's a Christian. This is magnificent. Get him to our youth event. You know, just a flood of emails and letters over the first few months. Please, can you come to this event? Can you come to that event? I mean, I'll tell you one funny story, but it was coming back to what you were talking about how do you be God's person in that place? You clearly cannot come on air on a Monday afternoon in Studio One at Television Centre and go, hi there, everyone. Welcome to Blue Peter. Good. I hope you had a good weekend. Before we go any further, I just want to tell you, Jesus is for real. He loves you, and he died for you. Amen.
Amen.
Coming up later, you can't do... I couldn't have come on air at Sky ahead of, a Man United game. I want to say, welcome to Old Trafford before we go any further and go into that. I'd lose my job straight away. The expectations of what I would be like as a TV presenter, as a Christian, I felt were unfair because I clearly can't do that. That's not witnessing because it'll end my witness tomorrow because, again, this guy keeps preaching. We can't keep him in the role. But what people did is they kept sending me these bracelets, which people here will remember, some of you, the WWJD bands, the black bands with WWJD that stood for What Would Jesus Do? And these very well-meaning Christians would send me these letters going, we know that when you do the makes on Blue Peter, so for the younger ones here who've never seen the show, we used to make things.
Tracy Island.
Tracy Island's an obvious one. I once made a doll's gym, out of various old items. You'd make banana bread, recipes and stuff. But basically, your hands would feature very close-up shots. So when they were I was showing someone how you tape this bit down, it was key. Your fingernails were neat and clean.
Nice.
But Christians thought, wouldn't it be lovely? Because they'd say, on your wrist will be the WWJD bracelet. And everyone's going to see it. And it's going to be an amazing witness to everyone at home. Probably not, because most people at home are going to go, what does that stand for? And no one who's not a Christian who hasn't heard these bands will have any idea. But I felt there was an unfair expectation on what being a Christian looked like. And for me now, what it looks like is I'm very open and honest about my faith. One of the things I did a few years ago, and social media, listen, it isn't everything. It really isn't. In lots of ways, it's nothing. But it's, I have a presence on there. Don't do so much on Musk's platform anymore. But I use Instagram quite a bit. And I remember just thinking, I remember looking at my bio one day, and I thought, it says on there, husband, dad, once a Blue Peter presenter, Sky Sports presenter, or something like that. And I thought, the most important part of who I am isn't even on there. And that is that I'm a Christian. I want people to know, and I don't care if they know. I want people to know that within the world that I work in of football, that I am a Christian. And I don't feel ashamed of that. but equally I don't feel that I need to come on air and preach about it. So it's who I am. The people I work with know that I'm a Christian. And I was really, really challenged after Gemma's funeral because quite a number of my work colleagues came to her funeral.
Yeah.
And this is coming back to how God has kind of reshaped me and changed me over the last few years. I got up to do the eulogy, as they call it, and I was really, obviously emotional, but I was quite raw, a bit like the book. I was just really honest with people about how I felt and about my anger towards God, but I was really real about faith in the mess, what it looks like, what it feels like. And I remember a colleague of mine from Sky saying to me in the days afterwards, he said, the one thing that all my Sky colleagues have said is we never knew how important, we knew you were a Christian, we never knew how important your faith was to you. And that really hit me hard because I thought, I want people to know how important my faith is to me. So I didn't mind getting quoted in a newspaper article after I got Soccer Saturday last season because I'd done it in an Instagram video that morning of being open and honest enough for people to say I struggle with anxiety still. I mean, it's been a lot better this season. That I do get onto my knees before I go through to the studio for 11:30 to go on air at 12. Every Saturday, I get on my knees in my dressing room, I put my hands out and I pray. Because I know that I can't do that job without God. It's too hard a job, it's too complicated, but I know that he gave me that job and he goes before me and he goes with me in the same way that he was with me through the last 7 years. And that was published in a national newspaper. Now that could have got twisted that I'm some nutter who goes to his dressing room and locks himself away, but the guy just quoted what I'd said very directly. No backlash. And I find it really interesting now that when I talk about my faith, particularly when I put videos up on, say, Instagram, very, very rarely is there anyone who comes back at you. Whereas a few years ago they used to. It make people quite angry, but I think people are searching more than ever. So that's how I see it. I feel like God's put me in a position where my responsibility as a presenter is to be the best I possibly can, to represent him in that place by being as good as I can be. And being his person in that place by being known as someone who follows Jesus Christ, by behaving in ways so that when the banter in the office reaches the point where I think, actually, I'm not comfortable with that, I can step back from it. When I see things, actually, while we're on air, that I feel, need calling out, I can do. Like a Norwich fan last season got quite badly bullied online, and I wanted to mention it on air that there's no place for that within social media, and we've got to stop calling them keyboard warriors because that makes them sound brave. They're keyboard cowards. So I use moments like that to kind of use my faith, but that's how I see it being used, because the minute I start using it as an opportunity to preach, that's when I lose my voice. And I'll try and get Bowles higher up the agenda.
Come on. Come on. Didn't it used to be on BBC Two or something?
Yeah.
I remember watching it. Yeah. Great watch, missed opportunity.
It's mesmeric. It draws you in, and then you find an hour or two's gone. Yeah, it's good.
Another question? Oh. We've got Tim, we've got Abby. Tim?
Hello. Jerry's praying right now. As a Tottenham fan married to a director at Ipswich, I'm staying way away from football on this one.
Very wise.
What were the worst things you ever had to do on Blue Peter?
The what?
The worst things they made you do on Blue Peter.
Oh, it's quite a long list. I think that one, I did skydiving, which I loved in the end, didn't love it at first. One that really scared me, because it was just a little bit, well, it was when we went down there. So basically, very quickly, one of the things I went down to do in Gosport, near Portsmouth, where the Navy are based, is to learn how submariners escape from a stricken submarine. Now, if a rescue vehicle can't get to it, there is a way of getting out, and then it's really down to you and the luck of the draw whether you survive or not. And down in Portsmouth, we've got this amazing white tower. It's over 100 foot high, and in that tower is a 100-foot deep tank of water. Massive, great thing.
Wow.
And it's where they teach submariners to escape from a submarine. And you're doing it at pressure. So it's about teaching you what you do in terms of breathing out on the way back to the surface that will decide whether your lungs explode or they don't explode. So I was sent down there by my director because he knew it's quite a scary film. There's a lot riding on it in terms of this is not one you want to panic on. So he sent me down for a day to go and have a look at it. So I got taken round with a group of young Navy SEALs to see it for the first time. And we stood at the top of this tower looking down at this tank, and we could see divers down below. And they said, right, gentlemen, classic military speak, I'm going to show you what's going to happen when you get it right and what happens when you get it wrong. So he basically says, you are about to see a wine bag. So they basically take a wine bag down. There's two of them. One's got a happy face on it, one's got a sad face on it. He said, this is the submariner who gets it right. So this balloon fires up from the bottom. And when it gets to the top, having been half full of air at the bottom, by the time it gets to the top, it's full. And it just bobs to the top. And he said, that's the diver who gets it right. And then they let the second wine bag up, where they've let no air out. And about 5 foot before it gets to the surface, the most almighty pop. And this thing explodes, and he just very simply went, and that'll be your lungs if you don't breathe out. So it was a very good demonstration, because it really hit you straight between the eyes. This is what this is about. I need to get this right. So I went back to my director and said, are you up for it? And I said, absolutely, yeah, I am. I mean, it was really, really scary, like really scary. But you come out, first of all, at about, I think, 20 or 30 meters. You go into a little bubble hatch on the side of it, and they lock the doors, seal them tight, and then they begin to pressurize it. And then they open the door on the side of the on the tank, and the water just comes in and out you go. And then you start breathing out. And then there's one right down the bottom where you wear the escape suit, and you go into a tiny little chamber that is like the chamber in the tower of a submarine. And you basically go in, they lock the door beneath you, and you basically just stand in there, and it's a horrendous noise, like a screaming noise, like a kettle going mad, as the pressure is basically cranked up so they can open the door. And then you hear this tap, and this door opens, and 100 foot of water comes pouring into the space, and you fly up like an absolute rocket. But you still, in the suit, have to breathe in and out all the way out, because it's less of a risk because you're in the suit, but there's still a risk. If you don't, your lungs pop. So it answers your question. That was probably it.
To be fair, it's understandable, isn't it? Simon, we're just so grateful for the time you've given us tonight. We could talk to Simon for hours.
I think there was one more there, wasn't there? I feel.
Do you feel bad for Abby?
Yeah.
Yeah, all right, Abby. Come on, let's have you. Someone wants to hear your question.
It lowers the tone a little bit, because it goes back to your experience with depression.
Oh, I thought it was going to be rude.
Sorry,
okay.
No. Not lowering the tone like that.
No. We'll leave that.
I know that everyone's experience of depression is very unique, and you're an amazing man. Thank you for telling us all that you have this evening. But do you have any words of advice for men that are dealing with depression that perhaps don't have a faith, and any nuggets that someone might take away that's struggling at the minute?
So my main message to men in particular, coming back to a little bit like what I was talking about earlier about the place I went to after the failed IVF attempts, is something that men I think are getting better at, but I think we still have a long way to go on this, and that is to change the conversation and the narrative around vulnerability. Because it's seen, particularly amongst men and particularly in the world of sport, that being vulnerable, so opening up in terms of how you are feeling and feeling that ability and that freedom to express how you're feeling, is seen as a weakness. And we've got to change the conversation on that. There was a really amazing piece of writing I saw by Pete Gregg, who wrote this amazing few words about unclenching the fist, daring to be vulnerable, daring to be weak. And that's what I try and encourage men to do, because my reaction to that disappointment all those years ago, and when my mood began to darken and I felt that I was going into a place of depression, was to kind of tense up and kind of close my fist. I don't want to talk to anybody. I don't want to see anybody. I don't want anybody to know how I'm feeling or what I'm struggling with. So when I walk into work, because I didn't come off work that time, I'm just going to go in. That's why I shouldn't have eaten Haribo while you're talking.
It's repeating on you.
And I see it too often. I'll finish with this story, because this, for me, is it in a nutshell in terms of why it's so important. You know, it's more than just talking. There has to be other action we do if we're struggling mentally. You know, one of the big decisions I took, because it's a whole other area we could have talked about, I had a really, really dangerous relationship with alcohol, particularly after Gemma died, like really dangerous. And it took me many, many years to get on top of it. And I've been sober now for 3 years, and it's the best decision I've ever made. And I just wish I'd made it earlier. But hey, I've let go of that shame because God's wiped it clean. But, you know, that was something that really fueled some of that as well. And I'd say if you're struggling with depression, please, alcohol is one of the worst bedfellows for mental health problems. It just turns everything up to volume 10. But that's a kind of side issue. But one of the things that I always think about when I'm talking about men being able to open up and vulnerable and be able to talk about how they're feeling and be able to have conversations and feel that sense of freedom to be able to say what they really feel and what they're struggling with is, I think back to this story. So we had an amazing cameraman who worked with us on Blue Peter called Will. So every summer, Blue Peter used to have an expedition, which was basically a foreign trip where we'd go abroad for 4, 5, 6 weeks. We went to places like Australia, India, Vietnam. There's some amazing places. But they were tiring trips. I'm expecting no sympathy. But they were, because you were filming every day in really hot countries. And you needed camera crews who were like Duracell bunnies, who were brilliant at their jobs, had a lot of energy, and had a really good temperament. So even when it's 38 degrees in the middle of Delhi and everyone's hooting their horns as they do there all the time, they're not going to lose the plot. So we had a guy called Will, who was from Melbourne in Australia. And Will was supremely talented cameraman, amazing. And he lived in Melbourne when he wasn't filming. He had a son called Jared, who was 10 at the time. His marriage had come to an end, sadly, but he adored his son. And Will was just everything he wanted, life and soul, great fun, good sense of humour, brilliant at his job, and never lost his rag. Just like that all the time. And about a year after I left Blue Peter, I got this message, one of those kind of messages that stops you in your tracks. And I just saw it. It was from a producer on Blue Peter. I'd left Blue Peter by this point. And she just said, I don't know if you know, but Will killed himself yesterday in Melbourne. And it was one of those just moments, you're like, what? And we didn't understand. We couldn't fathom why this amazing man who absolutely adored his son had done that. It ended his life. But as the weeks went on, and this is why I tell this story, as the weeks went on and we learnt more and more, what we found out from his mate Roger, who was the sound man who always travelled with him, is that Will had decided he never wanted people to know this because he didn't want it to define who he was. It didn't want it to be something that maybe meant he didn't get work anymore. Will was bipolar. And it explained why Will was always up really late at night, because he never wanted to be on his own for very long. But when he went back home and didn't have work and he wasn't around his son, Will would go to some really dark places. But because he also didn't want anyone to know, no one's looking out for him. And it leads into that place. Listen, he could have gone there anyway, even if people had known. But I often think about that story and go, I would like to think, and I don't think I'd have felt any less towards Will as a man, as a father, as a cameraman, if I'd known he's bipolar than if I didn't. And so I'd encourage you, particularly men, don't be that man who clenches his fist and just, I'm just going to grit my teeth and get on with it. Don't, because it costs too many lives. There are too many, in particular, men who are losing their lives, who are taking their lives because they didn't dare open up and say, I'm struggling. So that's what I'd say.
Simon, thank you so much for giving us all of your time. Simon is very happy to meet you and to have a photo taken with you, if that's what you want. Just to remind you, if you've parked at Northgate High School, you do need to be out before 10 o'clock, which I know puts some pressure on, but they will lock you in. We've experienced it many times before in this church. So just a little warning to you. Simon, thank you so much for all the time you've given us,
being here.
everything that you've shared with us. God bless you and your family.
Thank you.
And we look forward to see how the rest of your life unfolds and how God continues to use you. Thank you so much.
No, thanks for making me so welcome. Cheers. Thank you. What was that?
Where can you get the book from?
I was going to say, in terms of the book, I'd say it's available in all good bookshops, but I've only seen it in one bookshop in 5 years. Basically, if I'm just being brutally honest, grief books don't sell very well because it's the kind of subject people like to steer clear of until they need to. But it's on Amazon. Yeah.
It's also, I bought mine from Waterstones, Norwich.
No, you didn't.
Yeah, Waterstones, Norwich.
Gerald's in Norwich had one copy until about 6 months ago.
Wow.
Yeah.
You bought it? Oh,
Not
you
me.
bought it.
My darling, I'm not buying my own book. Very good, though. As a heckle goes.
It's very
in
good.
church.
It's very good.
That's a 10 on 10.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for being with us tonight. If you would like to explore life's big questions, you're very welcome to join us for Alpha. On the screen, there's some details there about how you can sign up or find out a little bit more. There's a QR code. Oh, I forgot about this. Thank you, Jerry.
It was your birthday yesterday.
It was Simon's birthday yesterday.
Would you like to sing to him?
Come on. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to Simon. Happy birthday to you. Oh, very good.
Thank you. I never thought I'd experience love like this in Ipswich.
Now, Simon, you do need to open your presents because
do I?
we bought you some presents, yeah. So you need to...
I've got a feeling this is, yeah. There will be a reason why I have to open it publicly.
Them.
Them. Oh my days.
Hey!
No focus, no.
Hey!
Outrageous. But I wish you well for the rest of the season.
We need it.
And see you next season.
Very good.
Guys.
Thank you so much,
Anyone want
everyone.
this? No, really.
It's for Ethan. You love it.
He may have the same reaction.
And thank you so much for joining us tonight, everyone. God bless you. Safe journey home. We hope to see you again very soon. Take care.
A Sunderland fan. When I went on a tour with him to Israel, I bought him a Sunderland fan. I bought him a new